an end-time vision of the rise of the Antichrist and the fall of Babylon. Welcome to this testimony and vision of the Great Tribulation. It all began when I had gone to dinner with my father and my mother. They were celebrating Father's Day on that day. However, the following day at dawn I had a vision during the night after the celebration. On that day when I went back home, I started to feel a little uncomfortable. When I arrived at my place I felt that there was a presence in the house. I had a feeling of uncertainty. I remember leaving the lamp in my room opened. It was usual for me to leave the light on, so that when I open the door at night I will not have to stumble, but I will have the light in the house. That day when I arrived at home I realized that something was moving inside. The first thing that came to my mind was that a person came to my apartment to steal, so I dialed 911 to call the police. I was about to press the button when I thought in myself I should enter the house to search and verify what is happening. Then I opened the door and I began to search everywhere. Yet I did not see anybody. I said maybe I am just imagine things. It was already late when I came back from where I was dining with my parents. I remember very well that once I entered the house I opened the air conditioning, and I lay down in bed later. Later I went to the kitchen and did something to eat. Finally I went to sleep, but at dawn of that Saturday morning, I was awakened by a loud noise coming from the kitchen. I got up and I went to the kitchen to check, and what was my surprise is that when I was checking the kitchen everything was on its place. I thought something must have caused this noise. When I went to check in the bathroom, I saw medication that fell on the ground. While I was checking everything, all of a sudden I began to feel a strong tremor. It was a very strong earthquake which shook the house. Then I started to see like flares of light coming from the pavement, as if there was lava below the ground. I was amazed by what I was seeing. Immediately I began to feel the floor heating, as if I was walking on the sidewalk when the sun is at its peak and burning my feet, while the ground was tearing apart in my house. I rushed to run and I threw myself on my bed. It was then I began to lose gradually my consciousness. As I lost consciousness, I remember very well that I woke up instantly, and when I opened my eyes I realized that I was out of my body, and I was looking at my apartment from outside my body, and from the exterior of the house. That's something I cannot explain. It is important that I mention that I was conscious when I was out of my body, yet most of my physical body was numb. On the other hand, I could see beyond the roof of my apartment. I could see through the dark and through material things, and my vision was considerably enlarged one way or another. I do not know how to explain it, but it was real. All this was out of logic and scientific explanation. As my body was laid paralyzed, in the blink of an eye I found myself in an apartment that I do not know, in which the furniture was strange. I do not know how, but I was aware of many things out of my body. It was as if I knew a lot of things. In this state my knowledge had increased considerably. Every time I found myself in a place I knew automatically the place where I was. I do not know how, but I knew it. It was as if my senses and understanding had become stronger and more sensitive. They were capturing more information than an ordinary man. I remember very well. I was observing everything in my surrounding. This was a very well-furnished apartment, but the furniture were not American nor Mexican style. The television was turned on. It was speaking in a foreign language that I can understand, because I studied this language when I was in high school for 4 years. Then I went outside. Immediately I saw that there were young people in the street. There were 3 boys and 2 girls. They were sitting warming food like in a grill, which was actually a portable stove, and they were drinking beer. I saw that this city was very similar to Paris, but it was not Paris, because I've been there. But I noticed it was another city in France. Something that has also attracted my attention was the clothing. People were dressed in a weird way. It was as if I had really woken up in the future, but not in a distant future. But the way of dressing, the girls' blouses and dress was different from nowadays fashion. Later when it was night, suddenly in the calm of the night, while it was 2 o'clock in the morning, I saw a young man descending from the balcony. He was screaming out and pointing at something at a distance. He was shouting so loud that he woke everybody. In this panic everybody joined him and began to observe where the young boy was pointing. While this was happening, I realized that my presence was not perceptible in this place. In other words, People could not realize that I was among them. In fact, I tried to speak to them, but they could neither see me nor hear me. The crowd was observing where the young boy was pointing. At that moment, when I looked, I could see a light far in the horizon, that illuminated the earth, similar to the rising of dawn in the morning, like when darkness dissipates and gives way to the light of day in the early morning. But what was curious is that the light that came to the horizon appeared reddish, later on it turned yellow. In a split second this light became like the sun, and it enlightened the whole city. In truth it lit up the whole earth, despite the fact that it was 2 a.m. Well, it was something instantaneous. While this light was shining from far away, to the great surprise of all, this luminous star shining like the sun began to move towards the earth. So it was actually a large ball of fire, and it was flying towards the earth. This star that was in Earth's trajectory was in collision with the earth. I could see that it was a little larger than the moon. This star was descending with awe and violence at full speed. It passed exactly above us. As a result, the sky and the earth was illuminated by this celestial body. As if the sun was in the middle of the day, everything was illuminated by the light of this meteorite. It was 2 o'clock in the morning, but we could see everywhere in the city, because the earth was illuminated as if it were noon, or half day. What I will tell you later is difficult for me. These are things which are in my memory that the Lord had shown me, which are very difficult to say. I could not forget what I saw. This ball of fire that had lit up the earth at night burned everything in its path. Buildings were crumbling and were burned, others were partly damaged. After the passage of this celestial object where we were, when I turned around to see young people who were in that neighborhood, I saw that they were burning. Their skin and their hair were falling to pieces on the ground. I heard the cries of terror. I had never seen anyone scream in pain like that before. It was horrible. I believe that God allowed me to see this and to testify, because these things are real. I used to watch TV reports of soldiers returning from war. They have seen horrible things. Many of them are traumatized and cannot sleep because they remember the images of what they have seen. This is similar to what I experience. Even though it was in a vision, it was so real. When the meteorite flew over the place, I felt the heat, but I could not burn because I was a spirit. But I felt a heat that I had not felt before. I live in the city of Laredo in Texas, where it is often 41 up to 43 degrees, so I know what the heat is. Well, this heat has nothing to do with the heat I am talking about. Not long ago I was in Israel on vacation in the desert, when we were taken to the mountains of Masada, where the air does not blow because it is at the lowest point of the earth, where the Dead Sea is. It was really super hot. It's much hotter than here in Texas. Well, even this heat cannot compare to the heat I'm talking about. This heat was different. It was as if you were inside a fire. I saw how everything was burning at the passage of this celestial star. The Bible say, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. At that time the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn. They will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven, with power and great glory. Beloved, as I was observing, at that very moment I saw a luminous star flying over us, and it went knocking at the other end of the horizon. As a result, I heard the impact of the explosion. There was a strong explosion. I have never been in bombing areas, but the impact was so strong that I began to feel pinch in my ears. Later I heard a very deep sound in my ears. As a result, blood was coming out from my ears. I think my eardrums had burst, because the sound of explosion was so loud. It was something that I could not bear even if it was miles away. If this impact was heard from all over the place, it's because it caused too much damage. There was devastation. At that very moment and instantly I was lifted in the atmosphere. I do not know how, but I think to a certain extent my spiritual body was moving according to my desire and my will, because when I wanted to know the extent of destruction and devastation, immediately I ended up at the atmosphere in the sky. In order to observe from space the destruction, I was able to behold the implication of this global cataclysm and calamity. The damage was apocalyptic. I could see clearly the damage caused by this star. Basically this star had actually impacted in the north of England. It was a part of the northern Britain. The impact was so great that the regions around Ireland and Norway was affected. I saw how the North Pole was impacted by the same explosion, and I saw exactly the place of the impact. This ball of fire came exactly from northern Italy. That's where it landed in the first place. So this celestial star entered the Earth atmosphere through Italy. It started by burning the north of Italy, and all the northwestern part of the country, and it completed its course in the north of England. From the atmosphere I could see the trajectory of this burning star, because I was looking at the Earth from space. I could see with precision what has happened. I saw a black line on the map of Europe where this luminous body had burned everything in its path, but I also saw how the North Pole began to melt. It started to melt, and I saw that there were big fires across the European continent caused by everything that had been burned. This star, this thing, I do not know if this is a meteorite or fireball. It entered the Earth's atmosphere. It had burned a lot of trees and forest, and I was observing the North Pole that was melting. My eyes were able to visualize everything, but I do not know how, but I could see what was happening. Then I saw how the water started to rise. Water level began to increase. As a result it affected the sea and ocean level. It affected the weather. It affected even small islands and coastal city and country. But there was something that I had noticed. It was as if the impact of this luminous star had contaminated the water. There was like radiation in the sea. Something was released by this star which made the water bitter. People could not drink water anymore. In fact, I saw people approaching the edge of river and trying to drink water, but they could not bear it. As if they were tasting salty sea water. I do not know, but it was something bitter. I looked at their faces and the expression of their faces was as if the water was bitter. It's really like when you eat something bitter. While I was in space observing the calamity and the disaster caused by this fiery star. Suddenly, in an instant I closed my eyes from the atmosphere, and I was already back in Laredo at Texas. And I was there near my home. I live in a region known as Mines Rock, and it's very visible here because there are yellow and big apartments. I landed in front of the main street, in front of the apartments in the high street, where there were two banks. One is bank called Compass and the other bank is called IBC. These banks are right across the main street, and I was walking between these bench around the bus stop. It was not so late, it was like 9 o'clock at night. Suddenly I saw a lady screaming and saying, "It cannot be true. It is not possible." The lady was traumatized to a certain extent. She said to me, "How can that be possible?" But it happened. While she was trying to talk to me, I saw people running from one place to another. Many were entering gas station and they were stealing. Order was lost a bit. I saw the police trying to restore order, but there were military in the street. But these were not military like the Marines. They were different. If I'm not mistaken, I think they called themselves rescuers or something. They came in tanks, and others came to walk the streets, and I saw that they were trying to put order. Actually, the disaster and destruction that hit Europe sent panic around the globe. It was still dawn in Europe, but in America it was still 9 p.m. Everybody was out in the street and they were in delusion and scared. Suddenly I see a lady who says to me, "I do not understand anything. First thousands of people disappeared from the earth, and they are nowhere to be found, and now this ball of fire burns the European continent. We fear what is to follow. What happening to this world? What are we going to become?" When an older lady of about 60 years heard this, she began to cry. She was traumatized and sorry. I also cried in despair. The Bible say, "For at that time there will be great tribulation, unmatched from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be seen again." If those days had not been cut short, nobody would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. At that time when I was on the main avenue, when I turned to look at the lady, it was like the Lord had moved back the time. Suddenly I saw something very unpleasant. May the Lord deliver men of God so that they may not have to go through what I saw in this vision. It's difficult for me because among the people that I saw was one that I know. He's a local pastor. I have a lot of respect for him. When I saw the treatment to which he was subjected in the Great Tribulation, I cried. I cried with sadness and despair to a certain extent. It hurt me a lot to see the conditions in which I saw the men of God. It was deplorable, gruesome and dreadful. I saw how the Antichrist agents began to stretch their ears. They removed their nails. The women had their ears pulled and ripped off by these people. I saw 2 people in particular, or 3. They were tearing off the hair of these ladies who missed the rapture. Other people who were tortured were screaming horribly. They screamed painfully. These agents of the Antichrist were cutting these Christians. They were cutting pieces of their flesh while they were still alive. They tore out their hair and they cut their noses. I saw pieces of nose between their nails. I saw how these men dismembered men of God who refused the seal of the Antichrist. They tore off their arms, their feet. They cut these Christians with things they had in hand. I saw one of them with a small knife. I saw another with a piece of glass cutting the face of their victim with hatred. I had never seen a human being become angry at his neighbor up to this point. These people were as crazy. They were thirsty for blood. I saw in their faces, in their eyes, the desire to kill, to destroy, to hurt. I did not know what was going on, and I began to realize the world in which I was at that time was different from the world as it is now. Today when you walk you feel security. At least there is something that gives humanity a sense of peace and security. There is balance and equilibrium, but in this world where I found myself during the Great Tribulation it was totally opposite. There was fear, terror, uncertainty and insecurity. Nature was not restricted like today. It was as if there was no peace. There was no rest. There were no laws. Men had lost the right. Christians who were rounded up for failing to comply to the recommendation of the authorities were no longer treated as citizens. They lost their right. They were tortured without trial. In this world under the rule of Antichrist there was not even the concept of morality. There was nothing. In the eyes of the world population who had the mark of Satan there was a void. People seemed to have no soul. There was only desire to hurt. At that moment I saw these captive who refused the mark of Satan. They were disfigured, treated like animals. Their eye was torn out of their hole. The layer of their skin was removed with the iron that was heated at high temperature. People were dying because they were bleeding. Others were losing consciousness because of the pain. At that moment I stopped and I wondered, in what world am I living in? What is this world? I said, Lord, what am I doing here? What are you showing me? Sometime I was saying and hoping that this was a vision. Yet it was so real that I did not believe it. The violence was really so strong that I wanted to get out of this unbearable world where I was. At that moment, I went behind the bank running. The house of my parents was about 5 paces. When I thought about my parents, suddenly I do not know how but I found myself outside my parents' house. When I was going to go into my parents' house, I noticed something. The house was different. My father was a man who loves plants very much. He watered them in the morning every day, but I noticed that these plants were dry, as if he was no longer paying attention to them. Then I saw strange cars parked in front of my parents' house. When I came in I saw that there were strange furniture. The only thing they had in the house that belonged to my parents was the TV in the living room, a big TV that we bought a few years ago. And there were several people inside but my parents were not there. In reality my parents were already raptured. They had gone to heaven, yet I was left behind and stuck in this unbearable world. These people in our house have nothing to do with my family. I have nothing against these people but they were dressed in a vulgar way. There were many women dressed in a very shameless way. This was no longer my parents' house where I felt peace every time I come. My father always got up at 5 in the morning to pray. My mother was a housekeeper. I would have liked to be with them. I saw so much destruction that I wanted to be with them and pray together as we always did. I told myself no matter the violence outside, as long as we will be together we will be strong. But it was no longer the house where I grew up, where we had happy moments and so much Christmas celebration. I felt demoralized. I had indignation. I wanted to drive these people out of our house, but I realized that I was invisible to them and I could not touch anything. I could not grab objects around me. It was like I was a ghost in their midst. These people were watching TV. They were watching a very famous channel here in the United States, a channel that gives CNN news in Spanish, and they were watching it. but they were watching it in English, and a journalist that I could recognize was talking to a politician. There were politicians above this person who was speaking on television, and apparently he was a kind of world leader. In fact, he was the Antichrist, but it was not in this way that he was introduced in television. Given that my knowledge had increased, I knew who he was. I knew what the real purpose of this person was. He spoke in a very convincing way. In fact, if Obama won the presidency of the United States, it was because of his way of speaking, not his way of handling things. But this person was different. He was still much more ingenious and much more charismatic than Obama, but at the same time he seemed to me a very serious person with a lot of authority. In fact, he does not look like a bad person. He seems like a visionary leader. He was very impressive in his words. This leader did not propose policy. He seemed to give orders and instruction. In everything he said, I saw the people who were sitting around him saying, "Yes, you're right, see. He speaks well." Normally in a house, even when I was at home, if we heard a speaker or a governor speak, there is always diverse opinion on their discourse. Some agree about one point and another disagree on another point. But I noticed that those watching the Antichrist speech in this house all agreed with him on all the points he raised. Everyone who was there agreed on how he spoke. This figure penetrated the minds and mental level of people when he was addressing them. When he spoke, he repeated what he said, while he repeated them again and again, to the point that his words echoed in my mind. I do not know how mental and mind control works, but I think he was trying to control me mentally. This person programmed the listeners and spectators who listened to him. He will program you to agree with what he is talking about. What is interesting is that I could see the date in the title of this news broadcast. I could see highlights scrolling on the screen. I saw in the news headlines of CNN that during the reign of the Antichrist there was a war between two countries that always had a good relationship. Never could I have thought they could be at war with each other because they are supposed to be sister nations, but there was war. Apart from the war, I saw the date and the year of this era of the Great Tribulation. As I said, it's not in a very distant future. When I saw all this, I was very surprised. I was despairing. In this time of trouble, people did not have consciousness. They had no power of choice. In this cable news network, the news anchor and this world leader were talking about people who were homosexual. A question was asked to the son of perdition about homosexuality. The news anchor asked him, why those who call themselves Christians oppose homosexuality. This person who was the Antichrist said, Jesus was like us. He never married a woman, just like me, brother and sister. When I watched the son of Satan speaking in CNN, it was clear that he was a homosexual, and he is at the center of the promotion of this practice that is against natural order, which is encouraged in television and in Western society. The Antichrist said to this CNN reporter, David, that the Christians say to be king of the Jews was one of God's favorites. Yet that man that Christian called God favorite said this in the scriptures. The love of Jonathan, who was his leader at that time, was more valuable to him. We see that David loved Jonathan more than women, but people do not notice this verse. David showed us the standard. He showed us an example. If God is love, he must accept us as he accepted David. When he spoke this way, I saw journalist and politician laughing. While this program was going on, I saw a sort of actor. He was dressed like Jesus with a crown of thorns. He walked like Jesus when he carried his cross. In fact, he was making fun of Jesus in this channel, and that left me very sad, because the Lord Jesus came to give his life for us. It cost him blood, and it cost him all his being. Blasphemy of the Son of God. The Lord Jesus came to give his life for us at the price of his blood, and it cost him his whole being. I was depressed by what I was seeing in this world, where there was ecological disaster and cataclysm. There was violence and torture against the children of God. There was the blasphemy of the person of the Lord Jesus by the son of Satan, and the condition of man who lost his conscience and his will because of the mark of the beast. As a result, humanity had become like robot. When I came out of the house of my parent, I was crying in despair. I said, I do not want this world. I do not want to be here. I said to the Lord, take me away from here. I squatted and began vomiting. Then I realized that there was a gentleman who was dressed with a kind of white dress. He wore another tunic like coffee on top. as if it were of coat, and he seemed like an elder because he had a white beard. But his eyes caught my attention. Normally the eyes of the elderly are wrinkled, and they lose brightness and they looked tired, but eyes of this man looked younger than mine. Her eyes was blue like water from the sea, very pretty. Her look was full of peace and tranquility, as if nothing that was happening around him could affect him. When I was looking at this being who was standing next to me, I felt like when you look at someone who has the answer to all your questions. That's how I felt. The first thing this being asked me was, "Why are you so shaken and depressed?" I told him everything I had saw, about the star of light and the fire that destroyed Europe, the pastor's torture, and what I saw on TV, and I told him that I was horrified by all that I had seen. When I told him this, he looked at me and he said, "This ball of light that you have seen is a stone. It is a stone that shout on earth. It is called absinthe." Immediately I remembered a passage in the Revelation. He told me that the impact of this rock is absinthe, because the water was bitter. I remember very well that people wanted to drink water but finally found it bitter. I started to understand a little. This old man started to bring some light, though I was still in darkness. Immediately I got up and told him, "I remember that this was written in John's apocalyptic vision, and I wonder how can this be possible?" I was troubled and I began to despair. At that moment he said to me, "Peace be with you," and when he declared peace to me, I literally felt peace filling me. I felt that his words calmed me down because I was troubled. They calmed my anxiety, while peace filled me. He said to me, "The judgment and the surge of God's wrath has just started, only the first 5 seals that have been opened, but the worst is still to come with the opening of the last 2 seals. The Ancient of Days to me, the Destroyer, Apollyon is coming, and there is nothing which can escape him on the earth." When he says these words, I ask him, "What destroyer? What are you talking about?" I did not understand, yet the Bible say, "When the 5th angel sounded the trumpet, I saw a star that fell from heaven on the earth. The key of the pit of the abyss was given to him, and he opened the pit of the abyss and there went up a smoke from the well, as the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by the smoke of the well, and from the smoke came out of the locusts, which spread abroad on the earth, and they were given power like the power of the scorpions of the earth. They had over them as king who is the angel of the abyss, named in Hebrew Abaddon, and in Greek Apollyon." I spoke to this man and he revealed to me deeper thing. When I was going to ask him a question, and he already knew the answer he was going to give me, what I said in my heart he knew. I was wondering in my mind, why is Europe devastated? He answered my thoughts by saying, "This burning star hit the Europeans because despite the fact that they knew the truth, they handed their crowns and authority to the Antichrist, and they deliberately placed themselves under his orders and command. They forgot about Jesus Christ, they forgot their duty as Christians,